shallow water blocks. Now, the terms for these two agreements are generally the same, but there are deviations in some cases in terms of where there's a signing bonus or the rate at which the portions of the block have to be relinquished over time. So with that said, one of the terms that I noticed was a big game changer for government was that the oil companies and their expatriates must pay their fair share of taxes. And that was a gaping loophole for revenue leakage in the Stabroek Block production sharing agreement. And I think government has shown that it is listening to the critics of the Stabroek Block production sharing agreement by plugging this loophole. And it's very important because it is unfair to have regular Guyanese citizens, the owners of the resource, paying your fair share of taxes every month, but the expats who are here, they get a tax-free ride.
Yeah.
So to level the playing field, I think that was a very important start in the draft agreements. And I'm looking forward to seeing what industry stakeholders have to say about it. Another provision that really struck me was the one pertaining to indemnification. And that says that under no point in time should the state, should taxpayers be held on the hook for any costs relating to damages, relating to any sort of compensation that is required of ExxonMobil or any other company that is awarded or participates and is successful in the licensing round. The country is not on the hook for that. And that's important because that provision is absent in the Stabroek Block PSA. So it's good to know that the government has sought to plug that loophole and to say, hey, the country should not be on the hook, period. You now have to arm yourself, or it's now required of the government now with that provision, if it is kept, to ensure that the companies that are awarded these blocks have the necessary policies in place to protect the government against being left with any cost should the company file for bankruptcy, for example. Another critical provision is that Guyana will have the power to review the budgets of these companies. So we now have a say.
I love that one.
Over what expenses you are really putting in. It's not just, okay, we see what you have and we have no say. We have to give approval as is. Right. So I love the fact that the power, we've retained that right to have a say over the budgets for exploration, development, and production. And Davina, finally, before we go further, there was another provision that I really thought was quite interesting. And that is that there are a list of international guidelines that are now in place. We now know for the first time how the government is going to be scoring or assessing field development plans. And prior to that, there were no industry standards that were made public. So I think that is such an amazing starting point. But again, as we say, what all of these provisions signify is that we have very intelligent leaders. We have intelligent leaders, but we now need to ascertain why these provisions cannot be applied to the Stabroek Block. Because what we will find ourselves doing is we will have two different standards for our offshore basin. And I don't think that is that sends a good message to the business environment.
Thank you very much, Kiana. And I completely agree with you there on your last point. Reading through your story, though, earlier today, there was a specific provision that jumped out to me. I mean, there are major improvements, but there is one specific provision that speaks to insurance,
Right.
that gives these oil companies a chance to actually self-insure. I myself am not very comfortable with this being in this new PSA. Because for listeners who might not be aware of what self-insurance is, what this provision is or what it allows for is for an oil company to hold this insurance and say, well, I have this policy, and if anything happens, I'm going to clean up. You don't need to worry. I don't need to have a policy taken out from with another insurance company. I am the holder of this policy. So I think this is frightening because we know how important insurance is, and so we wouldn't want an oil company to continue to self-insure us. We want to ensure that there is a solid policy in place that if something does happen, that we are adequately insured and we can take those steps and so on. Now that I have gotten that out of the way, from going through the PSA, the new PSA, one of the things that I also found is that there is an improvement in terms of the relinquishment provision. So this new contract, it says after 10 years, the contractor must give back 50% of the contract area. You spoke about leveling the playing field earlier. This is much different than what Exxon has.
Absolutely.
It's quite different from what Exxon has actually. They have such a large field,
Excuse me.
6.6 million acres.
Correct.
Right. So these new blocks will just, it's not even half of that. I think Mr. Barjactio said it's going to be about between 1,000 and 3,000. What was it? Square miles. I
Yes.
can't remember the exact measurement, but we will get that
Excuse
for
me.
you during the course of the program. But it's just to say that it's here we have these smaller blocks that are going to be auctioned, and in a matter of 10 years, the holder of that block will have to give back 50%, half of what he holds. But Exxon, on the other hand, that holds such a large block, they're allowed to keep and give back only 20% after the time has elapsed. So that's just one of the things I wanted to point out. Kiana, you spoke about the budget, so I'm not going to go back
Excuse me.
to
I'm
my
traveling
point
from
on
a cold.
that. But there is a new clause that has been inserted, and it speaks to flaring and the venting of gas. So I'm just going to quote for you a section of the PSA. At Article 20.1, it says, the contractor shall plan and develop petroleum projects on the basis of zero routine flaring and venting in accordance with current best international industry standards and practices. So it goes on to say that the contractor may only flare or vent gas if there is an emergency, when flaring is essential to protect health, the environment, and life, or if there is approval from the minister, or in certain operational situations. Now, I find this to be somehow troublesome, as I would term it as a loophole actually, because it's saying here in clear words that the contractor may flare gas at any time if there is an emergency where it is essential to protect life, health, property, or the environment. Now, this may very well, how do we determine if this contractor or this operator really has an emergency? So I think if this provision is to be made effective, we need to have systems in place for monitoring. So we need to have people on board to determine and say, hey, this really is a case. If we don't flare this gas, then we're going to have a major issue. People's health might be involved, lives may be lost, etc. So we have to have systems in place to verify that this is the case, so that flaring can take place actually. Kiana, is there anything you wanted to say about that?
I do agree with the concerns that you raised. And while you were talking, I think it moves me to be convinced that this document ought to have been tabled in Parliament. And I think that it should have been, or it should be, the subject of intense scrutiny from a parliamentary perspective, so that we can invite stakeholders to actually make public presentations on some of these findings. I think the point in time we are at in our history and the production cycle and how fast we're moving in this industry, I think with what you're pointing out there, we're just on the tip of the iceberg, because these documents were released last night, and this is what we were able to already uncover with a preliminary review. And I think that this document would serve the country, serve as a really good debating point for the country, especially to hear what our leaders have to say on both sides, and for us to understand who are the crafters, the drafters behind this document. Now, I was made to understand after watching an interview with the vice president at Sarah Week. He was being interviewed by Daniel Jurgen, who is a giant, a very respected expert in the oil and gas industry. He said that IHS Markit is providing the advice to government along with other stakeholders. And I think the snippets that we get sometimes in terms of who has a hand in these documents, I think that state of affairs, it needs to be improved significantly. We need to know who are the people and who are their interests, what are their interests when it comes to crafting these documents, because these documents will shape who gets what and how our resources are managed. So that's the first thing for me. Listening to the concerns that you raised there, Davina, I would support this document going to the floor of the National Assembly, being subjected to scrutiny and to a real comprehensive debate about the policies that ought to be underpinning the oil and gas industry. But Davina, I don't want us to spend too much time on this issue, while it is the heart of what we are discussing here tonight, because there's so many issues in the oil and gas industry that we still need to lend our voices to, and one of that has to do with the rate at which projects are being approved. While this consultation process is ongoing, we have ExxonMobil rushing to get approval for rushing to get approval for a fifth project, right, as well as preparing itself to get the EIA, the environmental impact assessment process going for a sixth project.
Yes.
And the monies to audit that document have already, the documents pertaining to the sixth project have already been, that's already been streamlined. I believe you wrote that story earlier this year. And so I think, Davina, while we're seeing we have this conversation about the pros and cons of the provisions in this document. I would love for us to spend some time as well, just touching on some of the key issues that our listeners still need to keep their eyes on. They still need to pay attention to. And another one of those issues has to do with the audits. We're halfway in March.
Right.
The audit report on ExxonMobil's expenses from 2018 to 2020, we've still not received, we've still not seen that document in the public. The last update, well, before the last update we got, it was from the Minister of Natural Resources, who said that this document would have been ready in March.
Right.
And at the Vice President's last press conference, he indicated that ExxonMobil has been given 2 months to respond to the findings of this document. So now that takes a longer time. And we're not, and I don't think that there's enough accountability on those types of matters, because this is $7.3 billion. That's that audit. Then there's the first audit, which has to do with it involves about 900 million US, and we don't know the results of that. That audit was actually done by the same company providing advice to us, which is IHS Markit. So, while on one hand we're seeing these glowing provisions.
Just to jump in a bit, I think it's been now 4 years after that contract was signed for that audit to be done.
Absolutely. And we haven't seen the results of that. And
for me, it kind of begs the question as to whether we will ever see the findings of this cost oil audit that has been conducted, because it's been 4 years. And the last thing I think we reported on regarding the pre-contract costs was that GRA and others are still going through this report. I don't know how to feel about that, because it's been years after. So what are we still waiting on? Why are we not privy to those details, right? So it's absolutely frustrating. And for me, as a citizen, I wonder whether I'll ever be privy to the details of this, the cost oil audit, which, like you said, is $7.3 billion US dollars. We're talking US dollars now. And as Mr. Lal always says, it's our resources. These people are exploiting our resources in our backyards. So he uses this analogy quite frequently. He says, just using my own words, if you send a man to the shop to buy stuff with your money, you would want to make sure that how this money is spent, you weren't robbed on anything and so on. So it's the same thing with developing our oil. We would want to make sure that there weren't any inflated costs. We aren't paying for what we shouldn't be paying for, and all these different things. So that is really the importance of us seeing the audit, the findings of the audit report.
Absolutely.
Good. You mentioned the rate at which we are approving these projects and so on. Aside from the resource factor, the financial aspect of it, I think we have been struggling critically in terms of keeping up environmentally and regulating the sector. We have been making strides slowly, but there's still so much, there's still a long way for us to go. And it is worrying, because when we hear these environmentalists speak and they raise their concerns about flaring and the dumping of the produced water, for me, again, as a citizen, not just a journalist and a radio host, I try to think of what the environment will be 10 years from now, when I perhaps have children, when they have children, what our water resources will be like, the air that we breathe. We know all these things. We've been going through these documents, and we know what it's likely to do to our environment. while that may be a concern for me, there are others who have their livelihoods involved. So it's not just about the environment for me and how, I will manage, but there are people's livelihoods that are involved. Fishermen have been complaining about fewer catches and so on, and we are yet to conduct a baseline study to determine what we have out there, so that there is a number to say, well, this is what we have. And so if we do have a depletion or a reduction in catches, we can say, hey, this is what we used to have and this is what we have now. So you have to pay us now, Exxon, for this, or whoever else is operating. So that's where we are.
And Davina, you make a very good point there. I completely agree that the pace at which this industry is going, we have 2 producing projects, and it's important for people to know that we are already stretched thin with our human resources to regulate just the implications, the boom, the economic boom that's happening from 2 producing ships. We are already stretched thin. What is going to happen when we are at the 5th and the 6th project? Where are we getting the human resources from? And so I think there needs to be a serious discussion and a plan from the government on how we plan to have an influx of experts who are on the side of who represent the interests of the state in dealing with the fiscal side, and as you said, the environmental side, because more than anything else, if the environment is what needs to be protected, we need to ensure that the resources are being extracted sustainably. And sometimes, Davina, I think people misunderstand the Kaieteur News approach. There are people who and I think sometimes it is just intentional. It's an intentional misrepresentation of the objective, where people think that the newspaper, the angle is anti-development, or it is anti foreign investment, and that is so far from the case, or that is anti-oil. The position is, yes, extract the oil, but ensure that the right systems are in place to ensure we're not, the environment is still being run in a sustainable manner, and that we're getting our fair share. And I don't think anything is unreasonable. There isn't any unreasonable request where that is concerned. And I take your point, Davina, that at the end of the day, while we are making strides with environmental regulation, much more needs to be done. We still have to ensure, for example, that we have full liability coverage in place. The environmental permits say, without a doubt, that Guyana is supposed to have a guarantee from the parent companies, and we are still in the negotiation process with ExxonMobil. Meanwhile, Liza 1 is operating, Liza 2 is operating, the 3rd ship is on its way, and that's Prosperity. And we have the Yellowtail construction for the 4th FPSO is ongoing. And now we're in the process of going through the 5th cycle.
You're right.
How do we do all of these things when we're not at the same time ensuring compliance? And that's what the issue is.
Exactly. And I think that is why we've been hearing chatter from environmentalists. They're actually saying that we should shut down the industry until we have these systems in place, until we can monitor what is happening offshore. And I think I'm leaning towards that call because I believe that we ought to have these mechanisms in place to be monitoring. Just as Mr. Lal would say, we have a business. We want to make sure that it is being done sustainably. We can't just rely on reports and perhaps the use of technology. I mean, it is a step in the right direction to use technology, but in the case of an oil spill, how soon can a technological device really pick up on an oil spill? Fine, okay, you can tell me when an oil spill do occur, but in terms of responding, how soon can we respond, and all these different things. And as we're on the issue of an oil spill, you mentioned the parent company guarantee. I find that some people may not understand the importance of a parent company guarantee, and I find that some people are even misguided as to what we mean when we say full liability coverage. So I'll try to explain that just a little bit. When we say a parent company guarantee or full liability coverage, we're not saying we need Exxon to put down $100 million, or not $100 million. We're not saying we need $5 billion or $7 to $5 billion to be held in an insurance as an insurance policy. What we're saying is that you are the parent company, ExxonMobil. We need you to sign a parent company guarantee in the form of a letter. You don't need to put down these huge billions. Sign us a letter so that you are on the hook, saying, I will cover for any environmental damage, any sort of losses that go beyond what my operator, EPGL, is offering you. So that costs them nothing. And people have been trying to defend them and say there's no such thing, and it's impossible. People can't hold this amount of money and all these different things. I think it's misleading to try to get away with that excuse. For me, if I have an operation or something, if Kiana, you're coming to exploit my mangoes, as Mr. Lal would say, I would want to make sure that if you damage my roof, or if you somehow flood up my yard, you don't have to give me all this money one time as an insurance policy. But what you would do is sign me a guarantee to say, Davina, I'm going to take care of these damages. You don't need to worry. And if, Kiana, you are so certain of your these high principles that you have in terms of safety, I'm certain that you will have no trouble. You will have no dispute about why you should sign this document. If you are certain about the safety of your operation, you are so sure that you've done this throughout how many other countries and whatever, you wouldn't have a problem to sign that document. Am I right?
Absolutely. And to Davina, to break that down a little further, it's the same situation with if you have a child and your child goes to school, breaks something, what assets that child has to really handle the cost of that. You got to look to the parent.
Yes.
It's exactly the parent you have to look to cover the costs.
Exactly.
But what Guyana is saying is, okay, you know what? The child probably got assets or what's not. We'll deal with that. It's an oversimplified look at the industry, but essentially that is what it is, and that is what stakeholders have been asking for, as you rightly said, Davina. We don't just want the child to say, okay, I will take care of the expenses. No. The international practice is that the parent company must provide a guarantee.
Right. And Kiana, ExxonMobil has been boasting about the speed at which its operations are going in Guyana at breakneck levels. They've never seen this at anywhere else. And so that's good for them. That it's good for them.
Right.
But what about what it's doing in the process? I think just tomorrow we'll be carrying a story to say increasing the rate of production is like throwing fuel into a fire. That's how dangerous it is. That's not my words. That is actually coming from Professor Hunt. You can look forward to that story definitely in tomorrow's newspaper. He's explaining the dangers associated with increasing our rate of production offshore in the absence of this parent company guarantee or this full liability coverage. These EIAs, Keanu, let me just break that down for the listeners who may not be familiar with that term. EIAs refer to environmental impact assessments, and this is a requirement by any, not just ExxonMobil, by any developer that wants to pursue a project that will have environmental impacts. What are your thoughts, Kiana, on these EIAs that have been conducted for offshore oil projects so far?
Well, I was reading a study recently by an American university where they highlighted that these environmental impact assessments, they're documents, huge documents that tell you about, all the different effects a project can have on air quality, water quality, sound, everything that, all the different environmental impacts that you can think of. And even social implications are also included in that. But my number one issue is that this is a very new sector, and something like EIAs for the oil and gas industry, the EPA should have been on a nationwide campaign to explain what to look for, what not to look for, or what is not, don't have overwhelming expectations or what's not of these documents. This is the EPA's role in doing these in reviewing these documents. And in my own review of these reports, I have found that they can be very convoluted, very technical, definitely not for the average reader to understand, because you go through some of these things, you have to read it over and over, check different terms, then refer back to the text. It's very technical. And I think it's important for us to sometimes demand that the EPA or ask of the EPA to get these companies to simplify these documents. That's first. Secondly, I think the EPA definitely needs to do more awareness campaigns on, what these documents entail and what they expect at the scoping meetings on these documents. And thirdly, and one of my issues is that as we talk about the environmental implications, okay, what can happen to the environment if there's a spill? What's the implications of a worst case scenario? My issue has always been, what is the cost of this? That there is irreversible damage, or there's damage that can happen to different transboundary neighbors, but what is the cost of it, so that I can have an idea?
Yeah.
Well, okay, in a worst case scenario, this project can cost us so much, and I can ask ExxonMobil, well, is the insurance enough? And then the thing is, we've looked at the cumulative impact assessments, which is, what would happen in the event if there is a spill or an issue that happens at 2 or 3 or more projects. Then what is the cost of that? So I think the the EIAs, there's a lot that needs to be fleshed out. A lot of stakeholders, industry stakeholders, have been pointing to some of the weaknesses in these documents. And they've also been raising concerns that you have one company that's predominantly chosen to do these documents, and
Right.
it's not, necessarily in the best interest
Yeah.
of the nation. So I think that's a real sore issue
Yeah.
that definitely needs to be better addressed from the EPA's perspective, and even ExxonMobil should be required to do more. One of the major concerns I had while I was at, I think it was the WARU consultation process on the EIA. Several questions were asked about insurance, and they could not answer. And it wasn't the first time
Yeah.
that those questions were being asked. And what I also get, Davina, is that there seems to be this sort of, flippant attitude when questions are asked, when citizens ask critical questions about, what are the protective mechanisms in place to ensure that this project is not going to cost us irreversible damage or leave us bankrupt. So that too for me is very unnerving at times to see the attitude that is meted out to journalists, that is meted out to stakeholders who ask genuine questions, who seek to get answers to their concerns. And I do hope that as more projects progress, we have more Guyanese coming out to these meetings, because more voices need to be heard on these issues.
Correct. While you were speaking, and I know just before we went into the issue of EIAs, we were discussing an oil spill, and you did mention during your remarks there about what would happen if an oil spill is to perhaps reach or go past the shores of Ghana. What if it enters another country? What if it affects a Caribbean country, one of our neighbors? And so there are possibilities of an oil spill reaching as many as 14 nations, 14 Caribbean nations. And so we refer to that as transboundary impacts. At least that's the fancy term they use in these EIAs, that there are likely transboundary impacts from these projects. I think what I would like to see as a journalist and as a citizen is for our leaders to address transboundary impacts. They have been talking about an oil spill as though it's just a local event, like
Very true.
as though it doesn't matter, it just wouldn't
me.
happen, it's not a possibility, and this just isn't so. We are considering an oil spill to be a minor event, and probably even an unlikely event, because they always seem to sugarcoat the situation to say, well, Exxon has been doing this for years. They're safe. We haven't had a massive spill for so long. And one of the major things that they would use to sugarcoat the situation, as for the want of a better term, they tell us that Guyana now has a capping stack in country. For listeners who may not be familiar with what a capping stack is, it's a piece of equipment that is used to put over a well, so that it covers the well, the well blowout. But Kiana, what bothers me is the fact that this piece of equipment is being seen and referred to as a holy grail. This thing that's going to be the solution to an oil spill. You don't need to worry, we have a capping stack. But I need an explanation as to what happens if an oil spill does not occur at a wellhead? What if a spill occurs, and we've seen this so many times, while oil is being transferred to another vessel? What happens then? How do we deal with such a spill? How do we deal with such a situation? And so, trying to massage an oil spill to say, man, we have a capping stack in country, is really such a lousy excuse. And I don't think that we as citizens should be accepting that. We need to know just how they plan to, or how they're going to address a spill that doesn't occur at a wellhead.
Davina, before you make that point, I want to lend my voice to it as well. I agree. We shouldn't let mechanisms such as capping stack, while important, allow us to be complacent about what the real issue is. And you made a very important point. We don't talk about what compensation or what will happen in terms of a spill possibly reaching one of our, regional partners. Is this 600 million per occurrence enough?
Yes.
Would that be enough? Would that be enough to handle what, would possibly happen to our environment? And would nations be accepting of that as well? And I think it's important that we have some type of study, or we see what underpins this 600 million, what they really took into consideration to accept this 600 million per occurrence.
Right. Josh,
Hello.
can you tell us if we're having any calls? Anybody anxious to lend a comment, ask a question?
Just in case they might have forgotten the numbers, it is 226-7453, 226-7454, or 502-4749. You can call us on WhatsApp. Mr. Lal is not here this evening, so you can only call us on 622-2222. That's WhatsApp. Last Monday we had a case where someone did not have enough credit. Just call us and cut us off, and we will return the call. We have a very first caller here. Caller, good evening, and go ahead.
Hi, good night, sir.
Good night.
Panel.
Good evening.
Most of the time, over 20 years, I work in the interior. This bed, the ocean bed and the land bed is hill and valley. Most time when we get diamond and gold is in the deep. The top don't hold much mineral because it is a string of running down in the deep. Most of the gold and the diamond we get in the deep. So these well what they're talking about, that the giving and taking insurance and all this thing is empty wells won't got nothing inside. We don't need nothing from there. We need it from what Exxon, what them including in this thing what they're talking about. Is in the deep where Exxon Olin with them and talking about this where we gotta get a share from. Right?
Thank you, caller. I think I understand.
Yes, the place is hill and valley, the whole ocean bed, all in when you walk in landwalk, it is be hill and valley. Now most of the mineral is be in the deep than the top.
Okay. So if I get you correct, caller, you're saying that the richest or the sweet spots of our resources it's in the deep.
Yes, it don't be at the top because the top, the most of the minerals just run down in the deep. If you do get at the top, it can be less, but in the deep hole more. And the sweetest part, it is be more thick there.
Well, caller, there is the principle of what you're saying. There is some truth to it, because we have seen in one of the shallow water blocks, which is Oranduke, 2 discoveries were made there, but they were heavy oil. And heavy oil is not, the most desired, especially when you have discoveries such as the light sweet crude in the Stavro block, which is more preferred. So indeed, as you do go further in to the shallow water blocks, it is believed that there's a lot of heavy oil, and even ExxonMobil one of its partners, Hess Corporation, did say that in their Hammerhead discovery, which is further towards the shallow end, it did encounter heavy oil. So, the CEO, John Hess, did say at a past conference, that as you go further in, you do find heavy oil. So I do take the point that the sweetness, it is highly likely, given the deep water discoveries made by ExxonMobil in the Stabro block, that the sweetest oil, our sweetest portion of the oil, is further deep. I can see with that principle.
Yes, and this man, the Gonziar, but this man said the most of the public saw these police and these soldiers. I think what the man said, the Gonziar, these work for happening because these people stiff-necked.
No, sir, caller. Okay, caller. The one thing that we're not going to tolerate or allow is
promote.
Yes, or promote is any insightful or insensitive comments. So callers, please remember to keep it respectful.
All right. Good evening. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, good night.
Good night.
Good evening, sir.
Good night, panel.
Good evening.
I know Mr. Lal is not here, but I'm certain you might be listening. Anyway, it's nice to see Kiana and Davina at the controls now. Nevertheless, my contribution is more or less like a little statements that I put together just now. So one of the things is that I heard you were talking about, and I think most of your discussion tonight was based on an environmental nature. So you talk about the FPSOs and so on. For the umpteenth time, I know Mr. Lal would have been repeating this thing countless times. Can you say to the nation, what is the legal limit of the amount of barrels any one FPSOs must produce per day? That is international environmental regulation. What is that amount, and how many barrels are these two FPSOs are producing currently?
That's your first question?
And, yeah, that's the first question.
All right. And the second?
The second, now, they have been doing the ramping up shore-based activities and so on, and we have this what you call a Vreeden Hoop shore-based artificial island coming on stream.
Right,
What
for the Vreeden Hoop.
EIA
Yeah.
was done about that man-made island that they're creating there. It made me wonder, why when the government, they are talking about this oil and gas sector, they are referring to Dubai. Anything is Dubai. Now, if one checks up the information that is available about the man-made islands that Dubai has created, like the palms and whatever the name, I can't remember the names, you would see that there was a lot of study that was done, environmental impact assessment of those islands. And I mean, those things, you would be surprised to know what implications those islands have out there. Now, my point for saying that is that island they're creating there at the mouth of the Demerara River would affect the way, from what I understand, the way how waves are going to come on the shore, and in so doing, it would affect the way sediments are being distributed. The geographers would say there's what we call longshore drift, and based on how the northeast trade winds are blowing towards the shore of Guyana, it goes up in a diagonal way, and whatever sediment comes on at 90 degrees angle to the shore, and it goes on like that until it diminishes. So I am wondering to know what would happen eventually. I mean, it affects, for one thing for sure, it will affect all the marine ecology around that area, the lives of the fishes, and maybe these shallow water fishes that they have there, possibly shrimp. I'm not au fait with what is there, but certainly it has an effect. But I think the politicians are weighing more profit over environment and the long term. So I have a concern about that. And then another observation is that some time ago, Dr. Vincent Adams was on air and he was saying that the current 2 FPSOs, the amount of produced water they are dumping overboard has caused an increase of the surrounding temperature in the waters to increase by 1 to 2 degrees Celsius. Now that's just 2 FPSOs. What would happen when we have 10 FPSOs around?
Right.
What would happen to the water? How high the temperature would go up, right? And what would eventually happen to all the marine organisms around here? So I am thinking that the government has no regards for the environment. That they're all concerned about is the profit and how much, they and their partners would probably get out of that, right? And it bothers me to know that if our government is doing this, then what else can we expect? I mean, this is like a hopeless situation, a doom and gloom situation for Guyana, because eventually the whole environment will be dismantled, disintegrated, and it will be affected, and we'll be left with everything here, the broken country, and Exxon and companies will just pick up and move.
Exactly.
Right? So it's something that Guyana needs to take stock of, and we need to get some affirmative action on the part of the companies operating and on the part of the government, so as to check these things. And Guyana finds itself at this juncture of the oil and gas business like one of those lucky countries. I say the word lucky in the sense that having had the experiences of over 100 and something years since oil has first been produced by all these nations, and all the information is available, what to do and what not to do. We should have had like a flawless oil industry, like where all the things should have been highly, highly regulated, just like the aviation industry is one of the most highly regulated industry in the world, right? And this oil industry in Guyana here is not much attention is being paid to it, and the companies get a free pass with almost everything. That is why the last time I said this is like Exxon Mobil's Guyana, like how back in the 60s and so on, it used to be referred to as Booker's Guyana. So once again, colonialism is alive and kicking, and they're getting away with murder, I should say, right? So those are my contributions tonight, and I would like to encourage you all to keep up the good work, and I look forward for more such programs in the coming future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, caller.
Yes.
All right.
Welcome, sir.
Welcome, Mr. Lau.
Thank you. I had to attend an emergency meeting, and I listened to the last two calls. I must firstly say namaste. I listened to the last two callers, the one prior to this one, and he asked a question, and I just want to touch maybe Miss Kiana missed the question. The gentleman was talking about gold, and I smiled when he began talking about gold.
Mm-hmm.
He said the further you dig, the more you get, the better you think. And he reminds me, and I think you did the story, but maybe you missed this question. You did the story in which Exxon, in which Hess Corporation boss said that they drilled up to 15,000 feet, and you can pick it up from there. Go ahead, take it. That was the question.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Okay, so I confused this question then.
Yes, I know that.
So the further you dig, the more the resource you get, the deeper, the more you find. Hess Corporation's CEO John Hess had said at a news conference that they had drilled 15,000 feet.
Beautiful.
And they found a lot of resources, but when they went 3,000 feet deeper, 18,000 feet,
Yes.
they found the mother lode.
Yes.
And they found, what they found was so big that it can support its own FPSO.
Precisely.
Okay, so I assume that the caller was actually talking about when you come further in, or actually you go further out.
Exactly, and that is that, and we didn't know that. We didn't know that until his boss revealed that a few weeks ago
Right.
at a press briefing. And then we realized when he said that the amount they found, they never realized that going further, they had so much, they could have achieved so much more. That as at present with 15,000 feet, their platform would not be able to handle the amount of oil, so they will need another platform right there to go 18,000 feet.
And that was the Fang Tooth discovery.
Yes, that was the question, gentlemen.
Okay, so
Thanks for that question.
you have a call here. Sir, go ahead. Good evening.
Good evening to the panel, Member Glenn.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My contribution to this program tonight, man, I would like to know that if you could assist me, man. If we should get an oil spill here in Guyana, right? Our neighboring country like Trinidad and Barbados and so on, if those countries would have been affected, and how would Exxon would have been compensating these countries for the economical losses and so on?
That's a beautiful question. Whole Kiana will take it or Divina.
Well, you know, Mr. Lal, just before you came in, that is the discussion we were
Yeah, we
having.
were talking about transboundary impacts.
Davina raised the point that one of the issues that we don't see a lot of conversation on is what are the mechanisms in place, what systems do we have in place to address transboundary impacts if an oil spill happens and it reaches Venezuela, Trinidad, even to Jamaica. And she pointed out that there are 40 countries that are at risk, that face risk of an oil spill. So the question is that 600 million policy that we have from the subsidiary EEPGL, is that enough? Would that be enough to handle the damage that would happen, the irreversible damage that would happen at our end, as well as what happens to other nations? And the answer is no, because we have seen industry practice with the Macondo oil spill. We've seen that the costs have been so astronomical. It is what we're talking about here is like raindrops in comparison.
Can you hold a moment? Let me add a little piece more to what Kiana said there. That's a question I posed to Vice President Jack Day when he was with me on my program. And he said Guyana has 600 million. And I told him, flat in his face, that 600 million will not be able to take care of 12 barrels of oil if we should have a spill with 12 barrels of oil. Not an oil spill or a well blowout. A well blowout will cost in the billions, in the tens of billions. Listen, look, just yesterday or the day before, we carried a story in the Kaieteur News. In the Philippines, they had a tanker that sunk. Just a tanker, a small ship that sunk.
Yeah, that's right.
And the damage it created or it caused, it exceeds $1 billion US that the tanker says they're unable to pay. Then, you know what happens here? That country or the surrounding countries have to face the consequences. So there's a bigger question there now, away from the an oil spill, from these platforms, these three platforms, Lisa 1, 2, 3, and now 4 that was approved. We are moving away from that now. We are talking about additional insurances from those ships that is coming here every week to upload 1 million barrel when they sail off from that FPSO, and it should sink anywhere out there. What becomes of Guyana or the region that has been affected?
Right.
That's a question no one is answering. This is why I saw the Red Thread people. They are beginning to wake up too, and held a street protest the other day, and asking for full liability coverage in the event of spills like this, both by the ship or by the platform. So we are really facing great danger.
You know, Mr. Lowell, before you came in, and even your comment, it hammers home to me that we are really running this industry in a very troubling, it is a frightening matter.
Well said.
Yeah, but
Because
Mr. Glenn,
What?
these people are going ahead with full pace, and they are approving more contracts without taking the environmental impact assessment into consideration. Whereby, if there should be a blowout or an oil spill, as you said earlier, is the insurance money that they have, the 600 million US, is the insurance is that they have presently now, is enough?
Thank you, my friend.
We have a similar question here from Ian Barakat. He's joining us online on Facebook. Ian is asking how much will Guyanese be on the hook for should there be an oil spill without full insurance? It's an interesting question, and we started discussing earlier in the program that in these EIAs, they're telling us about the likelihood of an oil spill, yes, but what they are not telling us is putting a cost to that. We need a cost factor to explain to us, for us to know the true dangers of what we are about to engage in. So it's okay to tell us, yes, an oil spill may occur, but Ian, just to answer your question, it could be it can be in the range of millions, and it can even be billions, hundreds of billions,
Wow.
even. So without that full liability coverage or that parent company guarantee,
Correct.
our sector, there will not be an oil sector here anymore, because we have not even been making more than $1 billion a year. So for us to try to attempt to clean up an oil spill, it's going to wipe out our sector. And so that is why we at Kaieteur News, the team here, and those who truly understand the depths, the disaster that an oil spill can have on our country and our neighbors, that is why we've been clamoring for that insurance, that full liability coverage, and that parent company guarantee to be signed. I hope you understand that, Ian. So thank you very much for your question.
And you know, Davina, I think it's a very interesting question, because the EPA, first of all, is in discussions with ExxonMobil for $2 billion. Then we have the 600 million. So let's say they get the 2 billion, and we have the 2.6. Now, who covers beyond that?
Exactly. That is a question that
is
our
on the hook
politicians need to answer.
for beyond 2.6?
I just want to add a piece to Divina. Divina, is not the oil sector is doomed. Guyana is doomed
Yes.
of an oil spill. That's the magnitude.
Yeah.
That's the length to what Guyana will become. There will be no turning back. An oil spill destroys the livelihoods of a country. It destroys the crops because the oil infiltrates the water on land. So it damages the crops. It happens all over in Africa, where farmers have to move inwards because the oil spill hamper and poison the land. So no growth. You could not have gotten growth. Right? And we have spoken about that. A gentleman is spoke tomorrow. That's one of our lead story. Tell him who write the story. You write it?
Which one? Oh, yes.
Yeah,
We did.
his story.
We did.
We spoke about it.
Yes, we did
Okay.
mention it
program.
earlier
Okay.
in the program.
In which the speed in which
Right.
Barajak there is going with this oil industry by baby pump, encouraging people to pump.
Yes.
Man, the gentleman said it's like throwing gasoline on fire.
Yes.
And it comes back to the insurance coverage, full liability coverage,
Right.
right? And you don't have that, and we're not getting that. And our VP is running ahead full speed with another one.
Let me remind you, you can call us on 226-7453, 226-7454, 622-2222. We have a call in here. Caller, good evening. Hello? Let me remind you that you have to lower the volume of your radio or whatever device you're listening to us from. Go ahead, Davina.
Earlier there was a caller came in with some very interesting questions and some points. Actually, he was talking about our safe operating limits, and he was trying to understand what are those limits. So caller, just to offer you some clarity there on your questions. So for each project, the EIA and EIA study is done, and that study is tailored specifically for that project. So it helps to inform based on the reservoirs and whatever else. They take everything into consideration, and they come up with varying safety production limits. So it outlines, each project has a different safety production limit. So for Liza 1, it's 120 barrels. You did ask us to help you understand what those are. It's 120,000 barrels daily at Liza 1. And just to give you an idea, we are going above that. We are operating beyond the safety level. We're actually producing roughly 150,000 barrels per day at Liza 1. And like Mr. Lala said just now, and we've been trying to get you to understand the dangers that are involved with going beyond these limits. Exxon has explained to us in a technical manner that they have done some debottlenecking, which is to allow for largening of the pipes to produce more in a safe manner. We have had experts that have advised us that this is not the way to do it. If you are going to produce even 1 barrel above that safety, that safe operating level, then you need to give us another EIA. You must update that EIA, because with that additional barrel of oil, there are more dangers. There's more gas online, there's more produced water, there are more dangers. If there's 1 barrel of spill, so all these things must be considered. I think he did mention, he tried to get from us whether an EIA study was done for the Vredenhoop-Shore-based project. That was actually a major issue for environmentalists because a study was waived. There was no environmental impact assessment that was done for that project. And for me, I travel daily across the Demerara River, and it's a massive facility, huge. And there are photos online on Facebook. You can go check those out for yourself. I'm sorry we can't share that with you. But it is a massive facility. And what they have done is created an island in the Demerara River. And one of the impacts, and that might just be me thinking, I'm thinking, where does that excess water go, Kiana? You are dumping lots of sand. You're building an island into this river. What happens to that excess water? Is going to flow over? What happens there?
The waste
and
management.
so people have concerns, and so these I don't think were ever addressed in the absence of an environmental impact assessment. And so, caller, I hope I was able to address some of your concerns. Thank you very much again for coming through and sharing with us.
To add to what you're saying, Davina, and the comments you provided were very comprehensive. So
Thank you.
thanks for that. I'm truly impressed with that. But to add to what you're saying and what the caller mentioned, he spoke about, Guyana is always referenced to being like Dubai. And, we want to produce as fast as Dubai, but we don't want to regulate like Dubai. So the difference, and I look at when I look at the comparison, we're rushing to fulfill this dream of being the fastest producer on a per capita basis without taking into consideration the lives that we are risking to meet this goal. It is beyond comprehension. And I really don't think that ExxonMobil would have the audacity to increase production beyond the safety limits in the US because there would be penalties. People would rise up against that. And to me, it shows how easily or how willing they are prepared to play with the lives, the safety, and the environmental environmental regulations, the lack of respect for that. How it shows you, it gives you an early insight into how they view this country. And it is such a wake-up call, because it's alarming that we too have actors or players who are subservient to what ExxonMobil and its partners are doing to this country. So, I agree with the caller that definitely more needs to be done in terms of regulating this industry. Right now, we are risking going above the safety limit. And this is the other point that I wanted to make. Hess Corporation CEO had the gall, the audacity to tell a recent press conference that they are going to go above, they're preparing to go above beyond above and beyond the safety limit for the second ship.
Wow.
So that they can increase the earnings.
It's all about money.
And it just goes to show, if the only thing that they are led by is doing good by their shareholders, but we have to demand the same from our leaders who we have elected to regulate and to run our industry. We need a complete overhaul, a completely different attitude, outlook, a complete everything where this industry is concerned. So I just wanted to add that. I mean, we constantly talk about being the next Dubai or the Dubai of the region, but it's only in terms of production.
Can I ask a quick question to you?
Yes.
Tell me and tell the audience if we have a regulatory body in place until now.
In terms of
The oil industry.
no, we don't have. We don't. We don't.
You have to tell the nation that.
We don't.
That's
We
what I want you to
don't.
tell
We
me.
don't have.
We have been pumping oil since when?
Yeah. Since
2019.
2019, December 20th, 2019.
Yes, and you don't
Yeah.
have.
An independent regulator for the industry.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
only hope the nation understands that. We dealing with fire and do not have a fire truck. 4 years now.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you
Correct.
have a fire,
Yeah.
right? A fire burning, keeps burning, and you don't have a fire truck on hand. That's what it means in a nutshell. That's why I asked that question. Go ahead, you have a phone.
Good evening, sir. Thank you for holding.
Yes, thank you for taking the call. Can you hear me clear?
Yes, we can.
Good. Mr. Glenlal and your two panelists, I want to congratulate you and to encourage you, right? I'm speaking more from the perspective you have an international audience, and the role and work you're doing is simply outstanding. I want to talk a little bit on the oil spill and to confirm what you said tonight, but to put it in perspective. I followed the oil spill that BP caused. Now, if you look at where the oil well was off of the Texas coast, right? The currents around facing the U.S. coast is very powerful. When the oil spill happened, it took several days before they could have capped the well, right? And if my recollection is correct, it was more than what the two or three wells Guyana has. But the distance from the oil spill to the shoreline was less than 200 to 300 miles that the Guyana shore has. So what happens when the oil spill occurs? If it occurs at the well bottom, at the surface of the sea, right? It depends on the currents how far it will take that oil spill. Now, if the aquatic life will be disintegrated, and the number of countries in that terrain, in terms of the Atlantic currents, will exceed what occurred with BP on the Texan coast. Now, BP spent $70 billion. And there are two issues I want to deal with this. The first issue is not the cost to the countries, in this case the United States and Texas. I want to deal with the cost of life on the aquatic floor. It will be devastating, right? Secondly, and more importantly, it will go to court because the Shell company has no $600 million is not even a joke, right? So what will happen when it goes to international courts, and when there is nothing in place, the oil companies will pull themselves out, and the question becomes, who bears the cost? The cost will go to who owns the resource, and the Guyanese people owns the resource. Now, what happens, as you, Mr. Glenlal, said tonight, it will shut down Guyana. Because for example, the Guyana GDP is $4 billion US. The BP spill was $70 billion, right? And so it will take more than 20 years of Guyana's GDP to cover one oil spill that only affected just the Texan coast. We are not sure how far the currents will take it, right? Even if it's oil, even if it's an oil vessel. Now, let's forget cost for a moment. Guyana does not even have the human resources to even monitor the cost of audit, right? BP, the United States Congress, under subpoena, called BP, and BP had the resources to go there and discuss with the fishermen in Texas who were affected. And the BP, one of the wealthiest companies in the world, oil company from the UK, had the resource and sat down and literally worked with tens of thousands of families in the United States to cover it. Now explain to me where in Guyana there's any human resource to sit down and cover with Guyanese families who will be affected and families from other countries.
Excellent.
Mr. I don't know if you're aware of it, but you've hit it right tonight.
Kiana will answer you that.
Oil spill.
Give Kiana a chance to
Guyana
answer
will
you.
shut down, and future generations will be saddled. So let us forget now 2%. Let us forget taxes. Let us forget ring fencing. Let us forget everything. Kiana was exactly right tonight when she said it is so serious, stop the oil production. If God forbid and there's an oil spill, the country known as Guyana will be shut down for generations to come. It is so frightening. We are not Guyana. The Guyanese people are getting nothing from oil. Absolutely nothing.
Well
and if
said.
an oil spill occurs, future generations
Yeah.
will be burdened with a debt. You will go back and study what happened to BP, and then you'll understand the seriousness of an oil spill. It will literally shut the country down. I want to end my comment by saying, Mr. Lal, if you can, sir, please continue the outstanding work you're doing with your two panelists, Kiana and Davina.
Yes.
You guys are doing an amazing job. My only recommendation, bring in more Guyanese voices, bring in the experts. You have an international audience, and we are listening to the good work that you guys are doing. Thank you for taking the call, and carry on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you very
so
much, sir.
Kiana?
So I want to add to what the caller said and reference a story that Kaieteur News did on February 22nd, 2023. And he's absolutely in order. Even with a 2.6 billion insurance policy from ExxonMobil, you can rest assured that they will enforce their legal might to fight every single case that you bring against them in an oil spill.
Not to pay.
And I just want to reference an example. The Exxon Valdez oil spill that happened in 1989. ExxonMobil was slapped with a 5 billion US judgment. And this was for fishermen, natives, and residents who were affected by the spill. You know, their lives, it was just completely, their livelihoods was just destroyed. You know what Exxon did? Exxon fought years and years and years and years until that 5 billion US judgment went down to 500 million US. What do you think they will do to Guyana? And in Guyana's case, we will have to pay their lawyer fees while they do it. That's what will happen to us.
That's stated in the contract.
Yes. So it will not be any walk in the park. ExxonMobil is not gonna roll over and say, okay, yeah, I accept, you know, give me all the judgments, I'll pay all the money. No, they're gonna fight it till the end. If they could fight you and get zero and get you to pay, they would. So it's, you know, it's not, you know, when we take these situations, these factors into consideration, it even hammers home the point. It underscores why we need to have this insurance policy in place so that we can be protected.
And that spill, Exxon fought the United States of America.
Yes.
The judgment was on Exxon to pay. Exxon dragged out that case by way of appealing and appealing and appealing. That tired the government of the United States.
Yes.
In which they had to settle for that 500 million
Yes.
instead of 5 billion American dollars. Like you rightly said, Kiana, what Guyana can fight for. And on top of that, we have to pay their lawyer fees.
Yep.
That's stated in the contract,
Yep.
which we sign on to. And President Ali and the Vice President Jagdeo is going to approve the 5th project with all these same terms and conditions, Uncle and Auntie. I didn't say that, Uncle and Auntie, but tonight, and I couldn't feel well. You know? Could you imagine this, Kiana? I like how you put it. Exxon is not going to roll over and pay. Exxon is going to fight because their fees are being paid by Guyana through our oil.
The
You know
fight
what?
could be sweeter for them because we paying for it.
Oh my. Ooh.
And, to add to the point you made, Mr. Lal, ExxonMobil tired out the U.S. government so much that the people had an extra 100 million US to go after, and they say, all right, it's okay. Don't worry. Keep it. It was such an exhaustive
Yes.
process in the court.
Yes.
Now, I don't know if we could stand the test of time like that.
Wow. Good evening, you're live. Good evening, you're live on the radio.
Oh, Len, yeah, man. You know, well, I think personally, you should have some drones in the air, buddy. To see what's going on in the island and still going on in the bush.
Oh
I
boy.
hear the picture in
Yeah,
the river now,
that
but they know
technology
that go there, there's triplets going on there. We need some drones in the air, buddy.
Mm. Oh, I heard a story. I heard a story today with what's going on there, and I don't have the time to tell you what's going on there. I'm going to talk it on a
Crying
program.
right now, my heart crying from where and it goes, no, God.
Hmm.
All right, we need
Thank
some
you.
drones in here, my brother. We need some drones.
Thank you.
Richest country in the world, why we can't put plenty of drones in here? And they got different grades of drones. They got drones that will defend the border and different things. They want to shoot them to shoot back and things.
Thank you.
Instead they put some drones in the air. Why you didn't mean you can think, but them things, what with them out them people? Them can't think, bro.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you.
Yeah, my brother. God bless.
God bless.
Keep on.
God
The
bless.
caller said we're the richest country in the world. I think that's just a perception, though. He said we're the richest country in the world. We are rich in resources,
Yes.
but we are not benefiting from those resources.
That's what people need to hear.
Mm-hmm. That's a
Right.
very good
It's
point,
like,
Davina.
It's like you have a loaded mango tree in your yard, but the children only getting 2 and 3 out of every 100. You know?
Very
of
true.
course, the village will pass and say, "Wow, that's a beautiful home. That home
Must be rich.
look-
They
yeah,
must be rich. Look at the mango tree
mangoes on the
loaded."
tree." But only if the villagers know that the neighbor taking 98 and left in 2 for the household. And this is what we have to keep knocking in people's ears, simple for them to understand. Can you imagine 100 barrels of oil out of that Guyana gets 2 barrel as royalty? And when they take out 75 after that, the remainder of the 23 is split half and half, and they call that 50-50 profit. You know? It's like when you total everything, you get 12 and a half, 13 and a half mango out of 100 mango with royalty and profits. That's how simple this thing is. Yes, so the mango tree look big, and but look what you're getting out of it. Look what your family getting out of it. Basically nothing. Take it.
Thank you for holding. Good evening.
Yes, good evening. Mr. Lal?
Good evening.
Yeah, good evening to you and your panel.
Good
Good
evening.
evening.
We are living in the 20th century, 21st century. Now, there is so much information available in the world today. You could just go on Google. There are so many media that you can go and get information. When you sit down and you look at the agreement that both government is signing on with Exxon, it can be mistakes. It can be a case of oversight. Something is definitely wrong. Definitely wrong. This could have never been a mistake.
Can you hold a moment?
And instead of I know we're advocating for more, we need more, and to get the full coverage insurance and all these things. But there's a big part that Guyanese need to ask themselves, what from these politicians
Excuse me.
to make these kind of agreement? And especially you may a couple of people make decision like this on behalf of 750,000 people.
Can you hold a moment?
That is something that seriously needs to be looked into.
Can you hold a moment? You hit the nail on its head by asking that question, by saying, this is not incompetence. This got to be something else. And I'll ask Kiana to answer you that question, because that story, Kiana wrote it and it's in today's newspaper. It's the lead story of today's newspaper, in which the government sent out a draft contract for 14 new oil blocks that they plan to auction. 14 new oil blocks, that they plan to auction. And here are some of the things that they are demanding in this new oil contract. Take it over, Kiana.
So, to the caller, thanks for the question. And I think it's, very interesting. It hits home to a point that we've been making even before we started tonight's program. The government can no longer, before I even say that, the documents that we examined prove that the government knows all of the fatal flaws of the Stabroek Block Production Sharing Agreement.
Thank you. Go ahead.
That's one. Secondly, they not only know what they are, but they know how to correct it.
You're gonna laugh.
Right? They know how to correct it. And in not only...
Hold a moment.
Right.
Hold a moment.
And
Let
only
her
the
finish.
Almighty God can answer that.
Pardon?
Go ahead.
So, in not only in doing those two things, the third thing that has happened is that the excuse of ignorance has been obliterated with these comments, with these documents. Government can no longer say we didn't know, because we now know that you know.
Exactly.
We now know that you know.
And you're saying it.
And one of the important, there are just two provisions that I want to mention that the government is proposing that really shook me and really made me understand that the government knows exactly how to safeguard the industry against abuse, against corruption, against massive exploitation. And one of them has to do with the power to approve the budgets presented by the oil companies. We must now have a say. And we will tell you what we don't want included in those budgets. That is the power that we have given to ourselves, that we propose to give to ourselves, with these new documents. And the second, one of the most important changes that we see, or loopholes being plugged, is that the government has said this country will not be left on the hook for any cost or any loss or any damage or any compensation of any kind or any form at any point in time. So you have literally placed the country into this cocoon now, where all costs and all liabilities is now on the company. And those two were, they're major provisions being proposed by government. One is to check the cost, to have a say in the cost, and the other one is to ensure that we're not left on the hook for any liabilities. And the government can no longer say, well, hey, we're still accepting advice, or this one slipped through the cracks, or, there wasn't enough consultation, or we didn't receive XYZ or what's not. That's through the window. The question now becomes, and what we need to get to the heart of, is why we're not applying these terms to the Stabroek Block Agreement.
Beautifully said.
That is the question now that needs to be hammered home.
Yes. And the nation needs to know that.
Yes.
If you know everything, if you know the right thing that Guyana needs to not only protect itself from an oil spill, but to put money in our pocket with these new oil blocks that you're going to put up for sale, then how come you're not correcting the one you have with ExxonMobil so that you can protect Guyana and protect our pockets at the same time? Why? And that is what the gentleman is asking. Why you're not protecting that one, in which that one holds the massive amount of oil? Why they're not putting together these same clause and
Provision.
Yeah, these are the provisions.
that protects Guyana? Why don't
Exactly.
you install them into the Starboard Block?
And Mr. Lal, when we started out tonight's program, Davina and I were actually well prepared, well oiled to dive into some of these provisions. And midway of the discussion, it was like, you know what, Davina? If they're not applying these provisions to the Stabroek Block, then we should not allow ourselves. Yes, it is important on one hand to explain and have a discussion on what are some of the proposed terms, but we must not allow this to weaken
Distract.
to weaken or distract our attention, our focus from ensuring that the right safeguards are made or are placed into the Stabroek Block Agreement, which holds the mother lode of the resources. It is beyond me, Mr. Lal, that when you hear HES Cooperation, and for those of you you don't listen to HES Cooperation's their earnings call or the conferences that they have, I implore you, just listen to one. You would think you're listening to a Guyanese and not an American. The way this man speaks about Guyana's resources, I think his only regret is that he wasn't born in Guyana, or he doesn't have, he's not naturalized.
How much he loved Guyana.
How much these resources
In love with him.
mean to his company and the bottom line. So caller, that's a very important question, and we will be asking that question, so not to worry.
I hear you, Kiana. I hear you.
Is there
You have
another
time?
caller?
Okay.
All right, so I think with that we've come to the closure of the closing period of tonight's program. This was a very enriching discussion. We've touched on so many different topics. Mr. Lal, you were certainly missed, but we are happy that you were able to join the Oil Queens for the latter part of our discussion. And we look forward to continuing this type of healthy discourse. And as one of the callers said or recommended, we definitely need to have more voices to the conversation. So hopefully next week we'll have more callers. We'll be engaging more of you into the oil and gas discussion. And with that, I'd like to say thanks again to Mr. Lal and to Davina for putting out your perspectives. It's always nice being in your company and sharing our perspectives. It's really enriching. And Josh, to you, you always do a very good job operating and monitoring the program. With that, I'd like to say thank you for listening, and over to Mr. Lal and Davina for their closing remarks.
Okay, thank you so much. I wanted to thank you all for joining in as well. And even as we wrap up here this evening, I wanted to just give you a quick reminder that there's a 2 weeks consultation period that is now open for you, citizens of Guyana, to offer your comments on these draft production sharing agreements that are going to govern future oil blocks. I want to encourage you to take the opportunity to go through those documents that are online. And write government to tell them what are your concerns, and do not miss the opportunity to encourage them as well to have Exxon Mobil be subjected to these same terms if you and your families would truly want a better future. That's all from me. Good evening and thank you so much for joining. Mr. Lal, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Divina. Thank you, Kiana. The gentleman asked, why don't we have more, a larger panel discussion with other persons involved? Many people have been asking me that same question over and over. It pops up all the time. And I keep telling them that we would love to have people joining us here to broaden the scope, the discussion. But it's very difficult to find people who understand this oil sector the way we here at Kaieteur News or some others in the media understands it, so we can blend in together, in which we don't have to be bitting against each other or trying to rebut each other. We must be on the same page. If we are saying something, we all must understand what we are saying. And that's that. But in time it will come when people begin to understand, like some of the phone calls, like how you people beginning to understand slowly. This thing takes years. Many countries took 30, 40, 50 years. I have said many times, Trinidad and Tobago after 100 years. Keith Rowley just 3 years ago realized that BP was shafting them $2 billion. That was a loophole. And what they did after 100 years. So it's not an easy subject matter to understand overnight. So we have to be careful what we say on the program, who we bring on to the program, because if we mislead, you don't want to give the other media houses and the government or the opposition to shot back at you and say, listen, Glenlal, you had Joshua there last night, and what he said there is misleading to the country. Then it puts the radio station and it puts all of us into this negative fashion. So we would like to have people, but it comes with time. And with that, I just want to say to you people, join me Friday, because I have some bombshells that I want to throw at you. So be on time, 7:20 sharp, and there you go. You'll listen to me. Do have a good night and namaste. God bless you guys all.